Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. On the incident ground in real life, there's no pause button. Every second counts. Every decision matters. The people stand behind you, the public watching from the street, and those whose lives often quite literally hang in the balance. They're all depending on you to lead with clarity, confidence, conviction. And yet, incident command is far more than just giving orders or following a set of rules. It's accumulation of decades of hard-won lessons, systems refined through tragedy, to be honest, and then hopefully a bit of wisdom of those who have come before us. In the UK Fire and Rescue Service, our approach to incident command has not always looked like it does today. You won't be surprised, there's been lots of variation, lots of differences, lots of isms up and down the UK. And we've journeyed from an informal, experience-led decision-making to a much more structured, risk-based framework that has saved countless lives, both firefighters and members of the public. Along the way, key figures like Chief Alan Brunacini and the Phoenix Fire Department have reshaped our thinking, influencing a generation of British fire officers to embrace concepts such as the span of control, sectorisation, and recognition prime decision-making. We've learned, often the hard way, the importance of dynamic risk assessment, the reality of the default to defensive principle, and the balance between offensive action and firefighter safety. In today's episode, I'm privileged to be joined by Kevin Arbuthnot, and we take a deep dive into how incident command has evolved in the UK. Not just in policy, but in culture, mindset, and leadership. We explore pivotal incidents that change the way we operate, the pressure of modern command in the age of greater public scrutiny, and the challenges of adapting to emerging risks like terrorism, climate-driven emergencies, and increasingly complex built environments. We're also going to tackle the ongoing debate: can incident command remain a living, breathing leadership framework, or is it in danger of becoming a tick box exercise? Now, if you're new to the white helmet or the yellow helmet with some stripes, this conversation will give you the foundation, hopefully, and the foresight to lead with confidence from day one. And if you've been commanding incidents for years, it will hopefully challenge you to reflect a little bit, refine, re-energize your approach, or at least understand some of the background behind it, because it's not always the way it's been. Incident command isn't optional. It's either done well or it's done poorly. And in our profession, that difference can be measured in lives saved or lives lost, or countless of millions of pounds of damage that didn't need to happen. This is about more than just tactics. It's about understanding the origins of the system, keeping hold of the essential principles, and ensuring that every decision you make under pressure comes from a place of competence, courage, and care. The fireground will always test you. The question is, will you be ready? I'll see you on the other side. What were some of the major sort of operational challenges, changes, some of the things that led the UK Fire and Rescue Service to formalise its incident command system in those sort of 1990s?
Yeah, well, it's a rigmarole. I'm sure you wouldn't expect anything less, as they always are. Yeah. I mean, personally, I had an interest in it for quite a few years before I went to West Yorkshire in 1994. My interest was fired up when I was on my divisional command course, and that was about 1989. And I went down, I was in Warwickshire at the time. I'd been in Tyne and Wear. I'd been in Warwickshire at the time. I went down to the Fire Service College, and I was expecting to be given all kinds of snippets of wisdom on how to conduct the divisional command role and all the rest of it. And it was a 9-week course, as I recall. And there was 1 hour where an old retired divisional commander from the West Midlands came down and rambled on about some incidents he'd been to. And I came away thinking, is that it? And simultaneous with that, I used to spend a bit of time in the Fire Service Library, being a bit sad. And that's when I came across Alan Brunacini's work, Fire Command. Just totally random. And I was really charmed by it, to put a no finer point on it. And I'm sure that his work is familiar to some, that this was the original edition from the early 80s. And apart from all the wisdom...
Who was this person? Just unfold that a little bit for me. Who was he? What was he? Yeah. Where's he from?
Alan Brunacini, known to all his friends as Bruno, was the chief of Phoenix Fire Department, Phoenix, Arizona. A massive character, as I found out later when I was privileged to meet him and work with him on a number of occasions. But back then, in 1989, as a younger divisional officer on this course, reading through his work, it kind of plugged the gap of all the things that I thought were missing from the British approach to training command, which was pretty much blank. So I was fired up, and if anybody gets that old first edition of Fire Command from the 1980s, not the second edition from the 2000s, at the back of it there was an appendix, and it was about 90 or 100 one-liners called Timeless Tactical Truths. And, you would regard them as...
I wish you'd have bloody told me about this beforehand. I'd have tried to hunt it down.
Well, it's okay. It's too... We're not going to go into it on detail.
I'll find it now.
Way,
it's okay.
Apart from being a complete professional, he was also a bit of a comedian. And these ranged from some really deep, insightful, philosophical statements all the way down to flippant things like, a brick on the head spoils your day and things like this. But all of them made sense in a firefighting context. And so I duly photocopied all that, which I'm sure I shouldn't have done, and took it home. It's been with me pretty much ever since. That was 1989.
Could you share some photos of them with me if you've still got them somewhere?
Yeah.
Would you think you'd be able to find a photo of them? We'll do that afterwards. Obviously not now.
Yeah.
But I made a note because, mate, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
So you were there for 9 weeks. What in God's earth were you doing for the other 8 weeks, 6 days?
No, I mean, I won't disrespect it altogether. It was, first of all, part of the problem with fire service college courses back in the day was that they were all inflated. There was this kind of strange attitude that the more important it was, the longer it had to be. And if they added weeks onto it, it made it more important. And that's why the brigade command course, I went up there 14 weeks. But don't forget, the junior officer course was 6 weeks residential, the junior officer advancement, 2 lots of 6 weeks. And then we did things like hazardous materials course, 5 weeks, divisional command course, 9 weeks. It's no coincidence that I'm divorced. And the fire service
Don't say
college,
that, mate. I'm just going through mine now.
Well, yeah. The fire service college played its role in that.
A lot to answer for.
The fire service, yeah. But having said that, I was a willing victim. I loved going down there because the beauty of the courses down there in those days was everybody went from up and down the country. So you spent your entire 9 weeks.
Networking aspect, yeah.
100%. And by the time I got spat out the end at the brigade command course in 1994, I knew someone in a senior position in every brigade in the country. Likewise, everybody else did. So I'm still not answering the initial question, but that's the background to it where my interest developed. Now, in the interim, I transferred in. I was a little bit of a gypsy in the fire service. I transferred into the West Midlands on the divisional command rota. I'd been brought up firefighter up to station officer in Tyne and Wear, and I missed the metropolitan environment. I missed going to fires a lot. So back into the West Midlands, where they had quite a few big fires, big factories, all that kind of stuff. And I also got introduced into the multi-agency environment because we had some interest in civil disturbances and things like this, which maybe we'll touch on later if we talk about gold, silver, bronze and things. But suffice to say, after my brigade command course in 1994, I was successful in getting an assistant chief officer operations job in West Yorkshire. And again, that was great for me in a number of ways. Coming back to Yorkshire, my home county, West Yorkshire being very, very operationally challenging. And at that time, the fire service was going through this turmoil of challenge from the health and safety executive. It was a lot of chief officers felt almost insulted that the HSE had come along and demanded that we abide by the same standards as industry, because we're sort of saying, well, we can't really, can we? Because we haven't got a fixed workplace. We don't know what the challenges in front of us are. A lot of valid things. But the HSE, there were some in the HSE that were very adamant that we should be doing a formal risk assessment before we committed people to a hazard zone. And there was the lobby on our side, of course, saying, well, we can't. You're going to destroy the fire service. If you expect fire engines to turn up and park up while someone goes around with a clipboard and comes up with a score and then decides whether you can operate or not, then the fire service is doomed.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of umming and ahhing and things, but again, I had picked up from Alan Brunacini's work about this idea of being able to declare a tactical situation very quickly and be able to do it intuitively. And that doesn't mean just a random guess. It really means being able to draw upon your knowledge, experience in an instant. And this is not magic or whatever. This is the same kind of risk assessment you use when you cross a road. It's you don't get a pad out and sort of say, oh, is the car to my left is now approaching at 35 miles an hour, or the car to the right is now approaching at 40. I think there'll be an opportunity to cross the road in 3.8 seconds. You don't do that. You just sort of say, it's not safe to go now. Now it's safe to go. Same as pulling out at a junction or overtaking on a motorway. So it's stuff that everybody does. Yeah, intuitive. And intuitive can mean or can be interpreted differently, especially amongst people who are, say, professional psychologists. But that is our usage of the word. And it has been the usage of the word in the fire service for all the 30 years that we've been doing this. So the long and the short of it was we were able to structure, and I put together a little group, because this had become over the 5 years that I was introduced to
circle back for a second. There was some pertinent incidents around that time, wasn't there? As well.
Well, that's it.
There was the HSE had gotten a little bit, because we were saying, no, we've got it. It's all right. Trust us. We've got a good eye on this one.
Yeah,
and they went,
well,
what about this and this? So what was happening around that time for people that we would have come with some of these in the past, but just give us some timestamps and some reference.
Well, the two key ones were, I would say, Gilender Street in London, where two BA warriors tragically perished. And this was a set of issues regarding breathing apparatus operations, guidelines, all that kind of stuff. But again, the actual grasp of the incident. The other key one where an improvement notice was eventually served was Sun Valley Poultry Factory, I think it was, in Hereford and Worcester. 93, yeah, that's correct. And there were still the overtones of...
that was another two firefighter fatality as well, wasn't it? That was?
Yes.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with Godiva Limited. Godiva is one of the world's leading providers of specialist equipment for emergency services market. Godiva produces a comprehensive range of fire pumps, including vehicle-mounted, portable, and their cutting-edge integrated total water flow control system, SAMFlows. I've been using Godiva my entire career as a reliable pump on the fire ground. It is such a crucial element of a successful firefighting team that you want to empower your crews with the very best, reliable, quality product. Reach out to our partners by checking the notes in the podcast. Now back to the show. Yeah, it was the Fennell inquiry, and the King's Cross had come out. They'd gone through a long inquiry process as well, hadn't they? So all of this was sort of falling out the back end of the sausage machine at the same time.
Yeah, and each of them came up with different little challenges to the fire service. I mean, take the Fennell one with King's Cross. I mean, down that one was a sort of the ridiculous numbers of changes of command within a short period of time, which you couldn't practically...
That happens in London, though, that does.
I think it happens it happens in lots of places.
Yeah,
and
sorry. Yes.
It was, yeah, we used to take a little bit of a poke when we could, but no disrespect to my London colleagues.
It's just because they're all so bloody close to each other. It's just all it is. There's just because they all arrive like dominoes, and everyone's changing hands, and that situational awareness can slip away from us. Anyway, my fault. Carry on.
No. What you just said is very relevant, and it comes down to part of the structure I put in place, because it's not just common to London, but any large metropolitan area where you've got plenty of stations and plenty of resources, you get your resources pretty quick, and you've got to make sure that you build into your structure. Could have been Merseyside,
could have been Manchester.
Yeah, West Yorkshire anyway. Yeah, all those things, and so. Yeah, these things all came together, and we were able to categorize them out into the three areas that you'll probably be familiar with from the original incident command system, which was, first of all, the whole business of trying to standardize a structure and the organizational structure, the language, terminology, the reporting lines, spans of control, all that fell into that. Then there was the risk assessment process, which I was going to say was ongoing for a long time. It probably still is ongoing as we speak. And the final one, which again I think has taken twists and turns, which are interesting, is the establishment of competence. Being whether how do you establish that someone is competent to command a pump or a group of pumps or a large multi-service incident? And so. But we thought, well, just because it's difficult to do doesn't mean to say we shouldn't make a start. And in 1994 in West Yorkshire, and it was only for West Yorkshire, there was no massive empire building ambitions. It was just a case of, shall we organise our operational procedures and standing operating procedures into these groups and try to get some order? Because there was one thing that I had a bit of a suspicion in my mind about. And this was based on having been from a rider station officer all the way through being a supervisory officer. It was kind of, well, when these supervisory officers come along, what do they do? And I started then, I started asking myself, well, when I went along to that incident, what did I do? What value did I add? Who was listening? Now, that could lead to some quite amusing anecdotes and all the rest of it, but it brought it to mind when I went up to, because West Yorkshire, we were in, you should never say you're lucky to have lots of fires, but we had lots of big fires. And you could guarantee a 10 pumper in the brigade average of once a week somewhere. So either as part of the mobilised as command assistant chief or going along to have a nosy, you would observe what was happening. And there was one time where it was almost like a cartoon. It had been drawn up specially for my purpose, where there was a mill burning merrily like a Roman candle on the top of a hill. And it was surrounded by yellow helmets. Now, around that circle, there was an outer circle, like the rings around Saturn, of white helmets. And there were some were going clockwise and some were going anti-clockwise. And when I actually went and investigated with crew commanders, as they were then, in later life they would have been sector commanders or something, I was sort of saying, well, what did he just tell you? Well, he said, do this. But the guy who had just gone clockwise the other way had said, do something different. And then the next guy who had come along had actually asked him about his recent holiday. And then the other guy going round, and there was absolutely no structure and no responsibility.
Some sort of parlour game, isn't it?
Well, it was a case of, it was a big fire, so command and control had mobilised larger numbers of officers, but with nothing specific to do. Now, you might say I'm over-characterising it, or I wasn't. That was it. That was the way it actually was. And I went down to the command unit where there was, I suppose you'd call him an area manager there, an SDO at the time, who was the incident commander before I took over. And he was just making notes, and he was making diagrams on the board and making notes or whatever. I said, well, what's going on out there? And he said, "Oh well, we've got this burning and we've got so and so here and all that." I said, "Well, what are we doing? What's the objective? You know." Well, obviously, I mean, simplistically, it's to put it out, but somewhere along the line, you've got to be a little bit more focused than that. And I'm afraid that within that little model or that little example, it gave me a trigger to start doing. And then you go along to a debrief afterwards, and debriefs were not by any means automatic, but and they became such, of course. But at the debrief, and I can speak for about the first half dozen or dozen ones that I attended when I was up there. They all followed a similar pattern. It was that the first officer to attend would come along and say, "We turned out at such and such a time. We arrived at this location at such and such a time. We found such and such, and I ordered 2 breathing apparatus and the first hose reel and get a hydrant in. And then I was relieved of command by Assistant Divisional Officer so and so, or Station Manager so and so would be today. And then Station Manager so and so would take the floor and then say, well, at such and such a time I took over from Station Manager so and so. But and it was just basically a chronology. Now, at each stage, they used to say quite courteously, and thank you for all the efforts of all the people who did an excellent job. And finally, at the end of it, then there'll be pictures of this burning embers of this collapsed structure. And it was a great job. Everybody did well, but it burnt down. And that was the end result of pretty much all of them.
Yeah. I always say the public doesn't know what good looks like, and they all go out eventually. So I'm not saying that's not being facetious, us two sitting here like we know more than somebody else, but it is just an element of that reflecting learning process. You're like, what? It's a very weird thing that we do because the public are going to clap either way, probably.
Well, I'll come back to that maybe later on, but in terms of the public, but even within the service, I've got to be honest with you. I mean, I was the new kid on the block, the new ACO coming in who obviously knew everything and was a pain in the backside. But I think I was maybe one of the first ones who were sort of saying, did we really do a good job there? Was, that the fact that burnt down again, and this one burnt down, and that one burnt down. And in fact, I said, do you realise that of all the ones that haven't burnt down, they're the ones where we knocked it on the predetermined attendance. We got there with, as it was then in the old risk areas, 3 pumps and an aerial, and we knocked it. And it wasn't in any newspapers, and there was no massive debrief, but that was a great job. Now, what happened between those 10 or 15 or 20 and this one where we got there and we didn't? Now, let's try to unpack why that became a 15 or 20 pumper.
Just got away from us, Kev. It was an inferno. You weren't there. Just got away from us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to a large extent.
Fire loading was massive.
Yeah. No, and you've got to as well. I had a lot of respect, for some of these guys. I mean, some of them, you maybe have a question mark over, but some of those Central Bradford Station officers who'd been around forever and seen everything, genuinely, you could put a trust in that if they'd been able to do a good job, they would have done. And I wanted to try and replicate what they could do and what they knew, and make that sort of a standard. So that the people at the stations that were only going to see a 10 pumper once every 20 years, would benefit.
What was the standard? So like when you first did your leading firefighters, or when you first did your first manager, leader, incident command scenario, incident command accreditation, whatever, what were you being taught in the 70s, I'm guessing? What were you... What was how did they go, all right, Kev, you're now safe to command up to 4 fire engines? Like, what were you actually being taught?
Yeah. Well, back in those days, I mean, you're probably aware that it was the leading fireman's exam, part 1 and part 2, and the part 2 was practical. The sub-officer exam, part 1 theoretical, part 2 practical. And the theoretical parts relied on an understanding of the manual, But again, if you go to the manual that was supposedly covering incident command, it was the old Part 6C. And it had pearls of wisdom in it, like, you go to an incident, you should establish a command structure. Oh, that's great. So you flick over the page and try to find what a command structure is. Nothing. No, that was it.
And you're into, right, I just shout loudly, point, and everyone's listening, marching to the beat of my drum in whatever direction that looks like.
You might think that's being humorous, but in actual fact, part 2 of each exam was actually that. It was.
Well, it was the drill, wasn't it? You would drill on the training ground, and you would have to lead a drill and show command presence and get people. You'd have to pick up errors, and is that the one you were about? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and later on. I mean, it was the 70s when I was a candidate. In the late 80s, I was an examiner, and it would not be too much to say that the candidates who succeeded were the ones who were taller and shouted loudest.
Yeah.
And
I was told, no matter what manner the crew gets off the truck, stop them in the first 10 seconds, tell them to get back on, and do it with a sense of urgency and a sense of assertiveness. Right, knock off, make up, back on the fire. No matter what they did, because one of the marking criteria was, give urgency to the crew or whatever. So I was like, whatever they do, they're not going to do it right. So just shout at them and get them to do it again.
Yeah, in the phrase the examiners were looking for, in inverted commas, was literally word of command. It was, has this person got word of command? And it encapsulated what you just said, command presence and all those kind of things. So, that's
what you were taught. And it had that very vague. So how did you get a sense of, and again, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but it's like, how did we know people? Did you do any fire behavior? I mean, I know some of the exams and the manuals referenced hydraulics, but it wasn't much in there in my personal, please correct me, there wasn't much in there about ventilation profiles, there wasn't much in there about reading a fire on first attendance. I don't think there was, please correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. I mean, the manuals in actual fact were quite good within what they did. I mean, you've mentioned, for example, hydraulics. There was a whole volume on hydraulics and water supplies, and it was
weirs and dams and Bernoulli theories and all that sort of stuff. Fantastic! I loved it.
Yeah,
doing all that in my IFEs.
It was
pitot
exactly
tubes.
That, and it was useful. But it wasn't until I first went to the college that I started coming across American fire literature. And I was actually reading American fire investigation and ventilation books in the early 80s. And that stuff was missing from our manuals. So we were playing some catch up, and we were a little bit arrogant to the British Fire Service. We just took it for granted. The British Fire Service was the best in the world, inverted commas, and all that kind of stuff. And I've spent a lot of time.
We are very good at policies and procedures. We are very good at that, and I don't say that facetiously. People have copied us and used our structures, but We've really dropped the ball. My words, not yours. We're doing a lot better, actually. There's a couple of great people around the UK, a couple of fantastic people. Paul Grimwood obviously brought up the rear with some fantastic work, and there's a number of others. And there's a couple these days doing it. But we really dropped the ball in fire science, research, development, fire behaviour, construction. We really dropped the ball on a lot of that. And a lot of other places. We had the grounding. We had a great grounding.
There was lots of good work going on at places like Boreham Wood and things like that, and snippets of it came out, but it wasn't structured in terms of the outcome of work at Boreham Wood going into courses.
Bingo National.
Bits of it did. Yeah, but
West Mids are very good, you know. West Mids have got a very good background, I think, of fire behaviour. West Mids are very good.
Yeah, but don't forget at the moment, the stage we're talking at on British Fire Service is we're going back 13, 40 years at the minute.
Yeah, I know.
And no, West Midlands, London, West Midlands, again, I'll say West Yorkshire had a lot to do in fire investigation. There was a lot of research done there. I'd say I got a huge admiration for Paul Grimwood, who my late brother, who was an ex-London fireman, worked with for some time. So, yeah,
Anyway,
it's good
I
to see
dragged you
all
down
that.
a rabbit hole. Sorry. So
No,
take us
it's
back to
okay.
back. So we had the HSE come through, said, "Sort yourselves out. Come on, this slapdash approach is not going to swing it anymore. You're obviously killing people. Sort it out." So you, and I'm sure you weren't the only one, but you internally thought, yeah, I'm like reading some of this more structured command. Was there, talking about things like the London model and stuff like that? My memory's horrific. What's the time frames around this stuff? When did that come about?
Lot later.
Okay, I apologise.
Yeah, a lot later. So no. What actually happened? This is where you have these happy coincidences, and it was around the same kind of time that Professor Rona Flynn had been, who had been investigating the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster, came up with a lot of really pertinent command science and the psychology of decision making and all those kind of stuff. And it meshed in my mind. It just sort of fed in straight away to the, by that time, conversations I'd had face to face with Alan Brunacini in Phoenix. And coming up with this recognition prime decision making, the slide tray, all that kind of stuff. And I was able to carve something out of that was acceptable to the HSE, to package it up in terms of dynamic risk assessment and the declaration of a tactical mode. And the declaration of a tactical mode over the radio waves, where it was time-stamped, was accepted by the HSE as the first stage of that took the place of being a written risk assessment. And although it was verbal, the fact it was time-stamped. Now that's why I had to become almost brutal in the brigade of insisting that they did do one over, and also that they did it quickly. And
this isn't a nice to. We're being given free rein on our agreement to make this declaration and to show that we have assessed a safe environment for our staff. You can't not do this. It will be a performance and capability thing or something like that. You've got to do it. You've got to do it.
I kept emphasizing time and time again that, look, if you don't do this, they're coming with a bigger stick. And it's going to be harder.
Because with all due respect as well, the risk assessments, they didn't get done till hours later anyway. Do you know what I mean? When we used to say, we'll do a risk assessment, and these are my words, not yours, but it's some paperwork that you fill in later and timestamp it from earlier because you're not going to, no one did it. You know, you didn't do an analytical risk assessment in the first 10, 15 minutes to do it. You ain't got goddamn time. You're too busy doing stuff. Now, you did look at all the stuff, and then when you've got that bit of breathing space in half an hour, you go, oh, bloody hell, someone shut me that pad, give it to the recruit, tell them to write down all the hazards on the left-hand side, and then I'll add some stuff in and I'll sign it.
At that time, Pete, you know, I mean, because the time frame now is from me sort of triggering this off and getting the first things on the SOPs in West Yorkshire was at least a year and a half. So now we're now into the time frame of 98, 1999, when I've been at it 3 or 4 years and what have you. And the HSE that had become very reasonable, I've got to say. And I even got to the stage of hosting a conference, a national conference in West Yorkshire, where I got the HSE to stand on stage and say that this was adequate. Now, to me, I'd won the prize. They
don't give that freely away, do they?
Absolutely not. And it wasn't clear to all what a great gift we'd been given. Now, it wasn't a get out of jail card. It was a case of you need to do it and do it properly. And also, not only that, I mean, a dynamic risk assessment made within the first couple of minutes, which is what I would have expected, was fine, but it didn't have a long lifespan. It would only have a lifespan of 5 or 10 minutes. Now, you still haven't, as you rightly point out, at that time, you still haven't got time to do a written, structured analytical risk assessment, but you have got time to review it and sort of say, yeah, we are still in offensive mode. And if you want to add anything by way of informative or addition to explain why, that was available. Now,
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
Going back to the first edition of the manual, which was published in 1999, based on procedures we'd been using already for about 2 or 3 years, and which, in fairness, some other large brigades within the Metropolitan Group had also been using voluntarily before the manual was published in 19. It was a bit of an honour. In that initial first edition, we had a single incident, even small incident, could be offensive or defensive, of course, as it still is. But in those days, a single incident that wasn't sectorized could be transitional. Now then, that got taken out because of lots of discussions leading up to the 2022 edition. And I was fine with the change, and it became afterwards pretty much what you would call a combined mode, where one sector's offensive, one's defensive, and all that kind of stuff. But in the years that have followed, and in some of the criticisms about particularly default to defensive, which I'm sure we might discuss, I have now, probably far too late, now I'm retired, I'm fairly convinced that we were right the first time to have the possibility of transitional. I'll give 2 examples just from the top of my head, which we used to use. One was the building was dangerous and burning fiercely, but there was a kid in the bedroom, and you were going to go and get that kid out of the bedroom. You would normally have declared defensive and stood outside, but you had a reason to be going inside. That's where we said you would declare transitional because, and you would give the rationale. And the other side was where.
But why is that not offensive though, in your mind?
Well, because it is offensive, but a proper risk assessment would have said you would not go in the building, right? And why? You are only going to go into that building. The benefit
outweighs the risk. You're considering it savable life.
Exactly that. And we use those for the first time in. That's one thing I borrowed directly from Alan Brunsini, by the way. They take some risk to save a savable life and all that kind of thing.
Maxim.
Yeah, there's Alan Brunsini's, and I accredit it to him every time. There's no doubt about it. But
most people don't know that.
So, well, right, okay. And the other thing on where transitional was appropriate was you turn up to a chemical tanker full of nasties in the middle of the night. You have not got the correct PPE at that particular time. You want to be offensive. You want to start securing the scene and all those kind of things, but you haven't got the correct PPE. You're not fully equipped, so you declare transitional until such times as the equipment or backup arrives, and then you go into the mode that you want. Now, yeah, there's flaws in all of that, and I can see the flaws, but that was the rationale.
I think there's just too much opportunity for mission creep.
Yeah, well, that's another. Another.
Just healthily pushing back. I wouldn't want us to get into an echo chamber where I'm just high fiving you. I'm just trying to object on behalf of myself and also probably the listener. But because I go, oh, you're saying it's transitional. Where? You know what I mean? So and so wanders into the toxic fluid because they weren't particularly briefed on where the boundaries were, or they went in a bit that was downwind of the fume or whatever. And we go, look, it's either safe or it's not safe. We're either taking action or we're not taking action.
Yeah.
Arguably, we're always taking some sort of action. I get it, but
Well, these were the discussions that actually led to it coming out of the manual. So yeah, your reservations are totally rational and healthy, and that's why they came out. But again, I still feel that in the debate about whether default to defensive is the correct thing to do, which has been rejected, I believe, in more recent years. And I can give a very strong defence of why it shouldn't have been rejected. Going back to that, the opportunity to have transitional at a single non-sectorised incident may have provided a bridge towards the answer.
So tell me what default to defensive means again, because we'll have listeners who are brand new in the fire service and people that aren't in the fire service at all. So what are we on about when we say default to defensive?
It was really, really simple. You arrive at an incident, and most times in the British Fire Service, you go offensive. You know, most of the jobs back in the day that I was, and I'm sure it hasn't changed too much, was, you know, you hop off with 2 breathing apparatus and a hose reel, and Bob's your uncle, and it's an offensive incident. You go in and you tackle it. Sometimes it's going end to end. There's no reason to be in there. You declare defensive, protect the surrounding risks and what have you. And that's a clear defensive mode. Now, if there are some complications of any kind, that's got to be taken into account, and it might take a few more seconds. And I say seconds, not minutes, before you can actually declare whether you're going to be defensive or offensive. Now, I had some delays of 5 minutes and even occasionally a 10-minute delay before a message came in, if at all. And control was having to prompt them. Can you declare your tactical mode? And they're saying, I don't know, but I've got 2 breathing apparatus and a hose reel in the job, but I can't declare a tactical mode yet. I'm sorry. That was totally unacceptable. It means that you weren't sure that it was safe, but you were letting them wander in there anyway. Well, that's freelancing.
Yeah.
That's not compliant. That would not have stood up against the HSE's scrutiny for the first flick of the page. Mm-hmm. So to add a little bit of discipline, I said, look, if after the first few seconds you can't make up your mind whether it's defensive or offensive, it's defensive. It means if you are unsure as the incident commander of the safety of your crew, make sure they're not in there until you've got some backup or some clearer rationale about what your incident plan is. So that became default to defensive. Now, I think over the years I have attended and I've witnessed and I've been to debriefs of large incidents where the first crews were annoyed that supervisory officers had pulled them out, where they thought, well, we can get in there, we could have knocked that and what have you. The supervisory officer took the opinion, we're going to go defensive because it is not clearly safe. And these are where these genuine difficult discussions arose about the in terms of, we'll risk a lot for a savable
it's risk
life.
appetite, isn't it? Yeah.
It was the second one that caused the difficulty. We will risk something to save a savable property. Now, that's too fluffy. It's too open-ended. It's a good principle, but how do you rationalise that between the challenges of the Fire Brigades Union, the challenges of the Health and Safety Executive, the willingness and the risk appetite, as you put it, of the first crews who want to go in, and the sense of responsibility of the super.
I personally feel that, in my head, higher risk appetite, I get it, knuckle dragging, moron firefighter, default to offensive. Because we're going to take some action. We're going to take some action. Now, as we increase our awareness, our situational awareness, our knowledge, our intelligence, information about hazards identification, all that sort of jazz, we may downgrade the level of action that we're going to take, but we're still going to take some action, even if we're going to throw jets in from the outside, or even if we're just going to put a cordon in for the public to make sure they don't go into the shark-infested custard. We're still going to be doing something. And the argument for me is, in terms of the HSE declaration, I need to declare offensive, even if I'm just sending Kev over there to put a cordon in place If you break your leg and fall down a manhole, I've put you into this work environment. If I say in my head, and again, I might be getting all this wrong, doubt it, but I might be a little bit off. If I say defensive, I'm saying we're standing back here, not approaching any hazards. And I think in defensive mode, there shouldn't be any injuries taking place.
Well, Am I wrong? Can I come and build?
Please,
let me
educate me.
Let me build on this.
Yep.
To start with, the default to offensive was you might as well scrap the whole thing. You might as well go back to where we were, because that's what we used to do. We used to default to offensive.
Yeah.
Now, in the example you used, I don't think there was a dilemma there. You're sort of saying there's a task I can see. I've got some people who are able to do it, and I'm sending them in to do it. That's fine. Just declare offensive. Yep. That's not a default to offensive. That is just a declaration of offensive. The problem comes if you've got some criteria or situation in front of you that you're not familiar with. But despite not being familiar or comfortable with it, we're going to go in anyway. Now, that's the problem area. And also, in terms of defensive has only got a limit. You will have a boundary which you have communicated to your crew about where the risk or hazard zone is, and where it ceases to be.
Where the warm zone starts. We're in the cold zone. You could still fall over here, but realistically, the hazard area begins there.
Yeah. It's exactly, and it's best to be simple. I would even go as far as to say it's best to be simplistic sometimes, because as soon as you start getting too sophisticated, too clever, it gets misinterpreted and all falls to pieces. So I don't think in the situation that you offered as an example, Pete, I don't think there's a dilemma, because we all did the same thing and would continue to do the same thing for most incidents. It's just these odd ones where the safety of the structure is not clear, the competence of the crew sometimes, and this is absolutely no disrespect to the part-time service, which I've worked with many times. But if you have rolled up with a recently recruited part-time crew out in the sticks somewhere, and you've got a nasty coloured smoke coming out of a basement, you need to have a different approach to the deployment than you would maybe in other circumstances.
Harsh truth.
So that is where the default to defensive came from. It's really just a case of, in those occasional instances, do not just think it's okay to send people in when you don't know what.
Mm-hmm. My reservation is predominantly as well, I don't like what I believe to be the creation of the timid firefighter or the timid commander. Timid is a bit offensive, maybe a little bit condescending, and that's not my intention. But the middle ground of savable property, that is somebody's business. That hotel, factory, whatever, employs 300 people. The economical effect and societal effect of us doing nothing, not doing nothing, that's an exaggeration as well, us not taking some really intentional, calculated risk to take some internal firefighting, whatever we can do. I don't like the whole, people sometimes use it as a badge of herd, people, nothing's worth a firefighter's life. Right, I didn't say that, did I? I didn't say, let's send Kevin to die. I said, let's send a crew in to explore it. No, I don't like it, don't like how it looks. Just to, be there 11 hours later, looking at a steel skeleton that didn't collapse and go, well, I guess you were wrong, but no one cares now anyway. But I feel like we could have done something about this. We could have stopped it at that room of origin on the 5th floor, rather than losing the whole floor, or rather than losing the 5th to the 11th. And now the hotel's out of commission. And actually, we realised 2 years later, the hotel gets sold and everybody lost their jobs. Not my problem. I get it. But it is our problem as well.
Yeah, let me some thoughts on this, okay? Because I've heard similar things, but
MSA are supporting us on today's podcast, and I chose to partner with them because I've been wearing this stuff for nearly 20 years, And they are the global leader in development, manufacture, and supply of incredible, safe products that really protect people, not just our communities out there, but also first responders, most importantly, all over the world. Get yourself over to MSA and have a look at it. The high-performance protective clothing for emergency services responders. They also partner with us on the UK Pink Firefighters. It's because we love them. The helmets with the reflective visor, the F1XF, absolutely epic helmet. And not forgetting how they improve firefighter safety through their connectivity in the connected firefighter platform. MSA are always pushing the envelope, and it's a real privilege to be able to continue to grow our partnership together. So whether it's your PPE, your bunker gear, your helmets, your SCBA, your thermal imaging, your Luna, or your portable gas detection, both of us know that this equipment needs to work. It needs to be high quality, reliable, and dependable in the moment. And that's why I use MSA, because they know what's at stake.
More since I've retired than when I was still operational, because the challenge when I was still operational was not getting them to go in, it was pulling them back.
Yeah.
And the challenge for the incident commander invariably was trying to get people out of a dangerous situation, because they were all the concept of a timid firefighter. I haven't heard it before, and it was the opposite of what I ever experienced. Now, there was a really
I would probably reinforce that with it is really the timid commander. Yeah, I would say that firefighters are still gung ho,
well,
little bulldogs on a leash, and I want them to be that way. But I feel like they're being heavily discouraged. So yeah, I retract that timid firefighter.
Well, again, I'll, before we even talk about the timid commander, I mean, there was a mill fire again. Had hundreds of them in Wakefield, funnily enough, in the Christmas of 1994, and it was a big one. You know, the usual 5, 6, 7 story, whatever. Yeah.
Was it? I think Dave Walton spoke about it.
Oh, when he spoke about it, I mean, he could have spoken. He could have chosen any one about 200. I'm just on about this one particular one.
Doesn't matter. Irrelevant. Carry on.
And at that time, Dave Walton, who I knew quite well from the West Midlands, was still in the West Midlands. So, this was a situation where we all turned up, and it was a cold, wet winter's night, 15 pumps or what have you, and they were all the usual, you know, all the water relay destruction. Firefighters were up the tower staircases, as was the normal approach. Jets going into the floors and what have you, making a valiant effort. Now, I just stood back and looked around, and at the far end of the mill yard, there was a load of demolition equipment parked up. And I managed to establish from someone responsible for site that the mill was about to be demolished on the Monday morning.
What the bloody hell are we doing?
Exactly. Now, that was a stark kind of example. Now, the example you gave of a hotel or a factory, or they employ people, they're central to our infrastructure, they're central to our economy. Absolutely. And there was never really a problem in terms of encouraging people to go in. Now, whether that's developed in subsequent years, you will be better placed than I am to say. But the system didn't have to account for trying to push people in. It was actually getting fire commanders to have the strength of personality to actually make firefighters with the blood up come back out. And there was the most heated debates and healthily so, at debriefs about, we should have been able to give them more time, what have you. There was one occasion, pardon me, and I'm trying to think what year this would be. This would be about 97, 98, when I went onto a large factory. And all the local crews were, again, another 15 pumper or what have you. And you could tell with some discussion I was having with a couple of people who, had seen a lot before, that we were not happy with the structure. So with a lot of spitting of feathers and what have you, we managed to get the crews out, and they were saying we could have had that, we could put that fire out, no problem. And then the roof went down in all one big almighty crash. And it was the one time in my career, and one time over, a lot of big incidents where you just said, well, there you go.
Twitchy bum moment.
some. Yeah, but it wasn't one where you would have had any chance. If they'd still been in there, it wouldn't have had a warning, creak, and a groan. They would have been under it. Now, I don't take any great pleasure because, there could easily have been a dozen times when I took that decision and it didn't come down, and I would have had to face all the criticism of the incident debrief, what have you. But that was just, it happens. I think that's the point I'm making. It does happen. And you've got to have the strength of your convictions. And don't forget, the convictions you have, you could only have them if you've prepared yourself well. We've spoken already about the Institution of Fire Engineers and the various exams and that, but firefighting is an engineering task. And you have got to prepare yourself for the technical challenge. If you are not technically competent...
That's where I think we're losing bits, I'll be honest with you. So, a friend of mine, his name's going to escape me, he's obviously not that good of a friend, or a study name. He said, firefighting is physics and chemistry. Unfortunately. It just that is what it is.
Yeah.
There's no romance about them. And this was probably some of the frustrations of the HSE, and I wouldn't put words in their mouth, and obviously I wasn't there, but we try... And I love it, obviously I love it, but we make it a very romantic thing, like an art form. And it is, sort of, to an extent. But it's also physics and chemistry, and structural engineering and interpretations of all of those. It's a complex system, but it can be understood. But we've lost a lot of that.
And this is why...
in IFE exams and leading firemen's exams, we ain't, unless you're picking it up accidentally, through an old book or a podcast or something else. We ain't really creating a lot of time to teach people this stuff as much anymore. There are a lot of people doing a lot of great work, but it's not part of the apprenticeships now. As an example, a lot of services around the UK are doing a firefighter apprenticeship.
This is what I think I was coming around the circle to say. The benefits, if you like, of the way we did it was the structured station officer stroke graduates, then the structured corporate membership exams. They did require that you read and you learned. Now, even, now having been away from the front line for a long time, that's why I still avidly follow the likes of Paul Grimwood and things, because he embraces the fact that it's an engineering task and also the firefighting art and skill. And I'm sure he would be.
I would credit people like Dan Stevens as a big proponent of a lot of that stuff as well. He's a geek. He loves it, and he's banging that drum hard alongside some other great watch manager, station managers. I would note some work in Manchester that's ongoing, some work in Lancashire, some great individuals in small pockets. My hope is we're seeing a resurgence of it. That's my hope. And anyway, I digress. Something we spoke about earlier, I didn't want us to skip past. Recognition, prime decision making. We didn't expand on that and the slide tray. Just unfold them a bit for myself and for the listener. What are we talking about
there? Yeah, I came across the term slide tray from Alan Brodacini. And again, as I say, I was fortunate enough to meet him in 1994 before I got the job in West Yorkshire, and also to meet Rona Flynn, who had been doing this work following Piper Alpha, and she came up with the recognition prime decision making as well. But of course, the recognition prime decision making was mainly the work of Gary Klein. And Gary Klein's work, I used it when I was doing courses and at the University of Bradford. The title of the book's called Sources of Power by Gary Klein, and it is the fundamental book to read about recognition. And it's quite simple, as all the great things are, that throughout your life, significant events, they do imprint on your mind, and you have a series of pictures. And let's go back to the crossing the road thing. You start off as an infant, and you're holding your mum's hand, and you want to run across, but she pulls you back and says, "No, look, there's that car coming there. That will knock you over. That'll squash you. That will." And you do it a few more times, and eventually you get to a stage where you're allowed to, and you look and you find, and you're using reference pictures from what was safe and what was not safe that you've picked up, and then eventually you develop your own. And it's no different to when you're driving. And in firefighting, or any technical task, in fact,
it's a way for us to down-regulate the cognitive power required, because the mind uses more calories than anything else. The fuel that's required by our brains is enormous. So we have to create these slipstream pathways to down-regulate our ability, because otherwise, if we had to make all the decisions in our prefrontal cortex, we'd never get anything done, because there's just so much going on that your mind is just dealing with in that recognition prime decision-making aspect. Because it's just, like you say, as a child, kettle hot, you touch it once, that's boxed off for the rest of your life. Then we don't touch the kettle when it's on because it's bloody hot,
I think you're, again, as a layman as well, I think you're describing the retrieval process, which hopefully goes on, as you say, intuitively behind the front cortex.
We spin through a Rolodex of images and scenarios in our head, don't we?
That is the thing. It's a case of how many images have you got in it? How many high-rise fires have you seen to be able to see that this one's got something different about it? How many road traffic accidents? How many entrapments? How many lift rescues? How many spillages? Now, clearly, as the years go by, particularly if you're a thoughtful kind of person and who reflects, because let's be brutal about it. If you're not a thoughtful kind of person who doesn't really pay much attention, you could go to thousands of incidents and not learn anything. So it's got to be a combination of having the desire, the intellect, the requirement, and then to be able to pull these things out. And you don't even have to actually physically pull them out. They present themselves to you. Something in the back of your mind sort of says, yeah, you've seen this before, and it wasn't quite like that. What's different? I think the starkest one I can pull from my own example is not a mega 20 pump thing or what have you. It was a humble hearth fire. And I don't know if you're probably a forgotten thing these days, but in the days of the open fires, sometimes there was a fault.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff. And there was sometimes a fault in construction that resulted in the timbers underneath the fireplace setting fire and gradually burning very, very slowly over hours and days sometimes. And I had the good fortune to be with a really experienced sub-officer when I was a young fireman. And we went to one of these things, and he pointed out we was touching the walls and all. And there was really a big decision to be made, because it was a nice, well-kept living room with good plaster and a decor. And he said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to get the hearth kit out and get the chisels and knock all that through. Now, fortunately, it proved the burning timbers were there to be seen at the end of it. Now, that lodged. Now, it was about 6 or 7 years later when I was by this time a rider station officer in Newcastle, and I saw something very similar. By this time, we had the luxury of a thermal imaging camera, which I brought out to confirm. And yeah, sure enough, the heat source was there creeping away along the side wall. And so again, another nice couple with a really well-kept house had to have a building site suddenly develop. But the decision was correct. And it was, if I hadn't had that in my slide tray, I'd never even thought of it.
That's how we lose thatch properties, because we don't be diligent enough on the initial call, and then it spreads into the wall lining, gets into the eaves. You're just never going to get it then. I've lost thatch properties before. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. You're better off like you say, causing 10 grand's worth of damage, knocking the living room to bits. Sometimes they've got a good access hatch from the rear, but a lot of these, they have shelves inside them as well, don't they? And you get a lot of stuff sitting on the shelves.
Indeed.
Where I live and work, very, very common chimney fires. So much of my first 5 years was in a more rural fire station. Chimney fires and combine harvesters non-stop. Slide trait.
And I've got to say, I've never had a thatch in my life.
Well, mate, and this is what we talk about, early intervention, because I remember us dicking about deciding where to put in the brake and then losing 5. We were talking to the guy that owned one of the properties down the bottom, and he said, "Oh, I've got some things in the house, blah blah blah, do you mind if I pop in and get them?" We were like, "Don't worry about that, brother, it's going to get nowhere near yours. We're going to cut all the chicken wire away here, we're going to put a brake in here, we've got these lances, we're going to da. Lost it all. Lost all 5 of them. Just really disappointing. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefights podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, by joining this, you'll not only support the future of the podcast, but also gain access to exclusive benefits. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. A growing collection of valuable resources to help you learn and grow. Your support in whatever way, dropping it in the WhatsApp group, sharing it on the local newsletter, whatever it is, it's incredibly valuable, and we really do support it, and we need it to make it a long-lasting resource, that legacy resource we always talk about for first responders, firefighters, and everybody everywhere who's ever been interested in joining the fire service. Now, if you're already supporting something, as many people do, it's totally cool. You can still access the podcast for free, and you'll always be able to access all the new episodes for free, but we're asking for your help to make this sustainable. And we want to keep growing, we want to keep sharing the insights, and we want to keep showcasing the incredible work happening in our community and our sector. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. You spoke before we came on, and an element that came out in this, spans of control. Where did this number 5 come from? Where did spans of control originate from? And was this a development on a previous understanding of our cognitive ability to interact and intake vital information from a number of people, or where did this come from?
It was military-based background. I think a lot of those things can be traced back to Clausewitz. But I'm just trying to think now, it's a lot of years have gone by, whether Alan Brunasini had anything to say on that. I'm sure he would have done, but it's a simple recognition that you can only talk to so many people at one time. And the truth of the matter is, if you're actually trying to assimilate everything someone's saying, you can actually only talk to one person at one time.
Yeah,
so,
100%.
But it's not practical to have lines of control with only one. So you have to sort of throw the dice, and you sort of say, look, it's likely in a normal, reasonably paced situation that if I don't have more than 5 people who want to speak to me, that maybe I can handle the 1 or 2 who want to speak to me at any one time. If it's a really fast-paced situation, you have to narrow it down. And then you get down to the 1 in 3 kind of thing, which I think is a little bit more familiar.
I think it came from Dunbar. You ever heard of Dunbar's number? Robin Dunbar was an anthropologist, so talking about the origins of people and all this sort of stuff. And it was around close friends, groups and stuff like that. I remember his numbers were layers of like social connections. So he said you could have a core group, really core group of 5 friends or people, like even in your family, You would have a core group of 5 people you knew like the back of your hand. And then you would have good friends that would extend to 15. Casual friends is 50. And I think you could have like 150 acquaintances. And I think it was like 500 faces or something like that. You could remember someone's face, just like up to 250, 500 people, but you could only have close, meaningful relationships with like 5 people. That was Robin Dunbar, because it talks about how communities are built. When we get to about 50 or 150 people, we'll fracture off into another community. It becomes too big to manage.
I'm sort of familiar with what you were describing about Dunbar, but actually I don't think that was down to the span of control thing. It was just really a case of how many people can you possibly have who may need to speak to you before you've gone too far, and before you can no longer manage and assimilate all the information things. So anyway, but span of control then became important in terms of determining how many sectors you should have. And I was a big belief in minimal structure, and the fewer the better. I also advocated very often that if you don't need sectors, don't have them. Because it was quite amusing when we first launched the system in West Yorkshire, and we launched it with all of its bits together. It was around about late 95 or into even 96. And I was getting these reports back from 4-pump fires, where there were 4 sectors, operations commanders, command support. And I thought, well, who's doing all that? And they were a bit surprised that having introduced the system, I would then go along and say, look, you don't need to overstructure. Just, a 4-pumper is a one sector job. It's a single incident. It's non-sectorized. So
take me. We spoke earlier about bronze, silver, gold command, and about that element of larger, a lot more complex incidents. When did we see that formally adopted as a recognised, operational, tactical, strategic sort of thing?
Yeah. Okay, so the gold, silver, bronze, as you're probably aware, is originated in the Metropolitan Police following the Brixton riots. Brixton riots, what was that, the early 80s, very early 80s. And in fact, I met some of the guys the superintendents who were responsible for devising it, the gold, silver, bronze, and it worked the police system really, really well. And it wasn't really a thing for us until we started getting more multi-agency jobs, and police would come along at the debriefs or the meetings we would have afterwards and sort of say, well, where was your silver? Where was your bronze? And we would have to have a little discussion sometime about, who actually was our bronze, because they were assuming that the officer in charge on scene was a bronze because their silver was away at the control and all these kind of stuff. And we had to sort of go through and structure it out and to get to where we are today. But it still was, I would say, not seamless, particularly at the gold level, because of, we had the dreaded egos came into it. And rather than seeing it as a functional thing, there were some that felt quite affronted that, despite the fact they went to the incident, took over, that they weren't gold still because they were chief or something like this. And I said, well, I'm sorry, if you go to the incident and you put on the white tabard and you're actually going to take some tactical control, you are silver. And, you might want to send a divisional officer or area manager or whatever you call them today away to the multi-agency group, and they can act as gold. But if you're on scene and actually acting as silver, you are silver. And some grasped it and some didn't. I mean, we had some good examples of it working well, like the Buncefield incident. I use that often great as a model of how it should work. The chief, Roy, was away at the gold, working really effectively with difficult decisions in a multi-agency group. And his deputy was on scene as a silver, and there were big important sectors with bronzes, and everybody understood that. But there were some times when it simply didn't, and some brigades where the chief would sort of say, "Oh well, I'm a tactical gold," and I said, "I'm sorry, no, you're not. That doesn't work." And of course, you would only if you were the duty principal officer, you were the sort of like the latent gold. If there was going to be a gold, it was you. And you had to make a decision about whether you were going to relinquish that gold stroke strategic position in the multi-agency group and go to the incident and do what you instinctively enjoyed doing, being the tactical commander, which sort of thing I fell into very often, or whether you would
gravitate towards it.
Or recognise that, in actual fact, the real decision making and the correct place to be, particularly on civil disturbances like we had the big Bradford riots in 2001. Again, another situation where the gold, silver, bronze was operating in a complex way, but still operated properly. Now, in recent times, well, I say recent, it's not so recent. Even when I was still on the command and control working groups and things like this, that they wanted to start devising a platinum. And, after having put my head in my hands and thinking, oh no, here we go again. It started coming down to the discussions about what was actually strategic, what is truly strategic. Because let me sort of say something which I'm fairly convinced about, is that the fire service, we don't do strategic. We don't need to do strategic.
Okay.
On the whole, our strategy is to rescue people and put out fires and what have you, using the equipment we've already pre-planned from the stations we've already established, using the people we've already... So pretty much from the time that the 3 nines go down, however big it gets, it's still big tactics. Now, occasionally you can have, I will acknowledge that you'll get some little variations or big variations on that. You can, especially in the multi-agency operations, specifically on counter-terrorism operations, where a genuine strategic decision may have to be made, where actually someone, you may recall that after the 2005 London bombings, the bomb factory was found in Leeds. There were some genuine high-level multi-agency discussions, government level, chief constable level, high military level, all going on. So I observe and I concede that there are times when there's genuine strategic going on, but on the whole, there's not. Now, on the other hand, just to sort of like really contradict myself, as every good discussion should have a self-contradiction, you could be a watch manager and make a strategic decision. If you have come across a really unusual situation that you've never come across before, and a standard operating procedure is clearly not going to work, and you are going to take it on your command responsibility yourself to vary the standard operating procedure, which constitutes an order, you have made a strategic decision, and you will need to back it up and justify it and all the rest of it. But it was actually, in its own way, a strategic decision.
Talking operational discretion there.
Operational discretion, yeah, but it says if we're trying to tease out what strategic means to us, it's worth taking all these things into your thought processes. And
I think we can. Sorry, the declaration of your tactical mode, even though the word tactical is in it, I would argue that's a strategic decision as well. So my strategy is, I'm going to go offensive or defensive. Is that am I taking risk or am I not taking risk? Is my strategy, and then how I take the risk. But then you could also expand that. If I could say my strategy is offensive exterior. Now the tactic could be an air ladder platform, a TL, a Cobra system, a Lance system, a whatever, a drone, a bloody robot, held hand, held a branch. There will be tactics within a strategic objective of I'm trying to. I don't know if I'm explaining.
Well, the problem,
the
problem we're both addressing at the minute is the language one. Now, what you've just outlined there is entirely valid within the Oxford English Dictionary definition of strategic. Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
But for our gold silver, we're I know what you're saying. Strategic is governmental, economical challenge. That we're not really doing that. Police and government are doing that. Yeah.
Well, I actually did an academic article, i.e., one that was blind refereed for the Journal of Civil Contingencies, about maybe 10 years ago now, where I tried to outline, because I'd done quite a lot for my sins with the New Dimension work. I'd done quite a lot with the military, a real lot with the military and high-level police, working out of Bramshill and when Bramshill was still there, and Wright and all those things. And so I did an article and a diagram which tried to rationalize the different interpretation of strategic between military, police, fire, local authority, all that kind of stuff. And I actually, for the sake of the article, proposed, quite against my own instincts, a level would be known as grand strategic to us, but would be quite normal to the military. And if this is probably where that platinum would come into it, but this would definitely be where Cobra would be in operation, because you can't, can you, if you think about it, have a gold group operating in Manchester or Birmingham or London or what have you, making so-called inverted comma strategic decisions, if there's something impinging on it that is being considered already now by intergovernmental multi-agency group at Cobra. So what do you call them? Sure. So hence the either grand strategic. And again, I was a little bit cheeky borrowing grand strategic, going back from the 19th century military philosopher Clausewitz. So it fitted in with the model of the gold, silver, bronze and where that had originated from. And again, going back to the origins of gold, silver, bronze, of course, the true origin was going back to Plato and his book, The Republic. If you want to come across the first iterations of the gold, silver, bronze, talking about the different strata of society. Totally meaningless. It doesn't mean anything now, but that's actually the ideas. The ideas have been around a long time.
Tier system, class system that we now see it as.
I'd try to avoid calling it class.
When we, because we do, I suppose, are we just overcomplicating it? You know what I mean? Because I'm trying to steelman the argument that disagrees with you, but I don't think I can. In terms of, like you said, I think most of the stuff we're doing is tactical.
Yeah.
I'm trying to disagree with it, but I don't think I can. And I get that when we are advising on local resilience forums for large flooding and wildfire and whatever, but we're not really making those decisions at that point, because we are just advising and consulting as part of a government group. That's maybe where we're tipping the toe into strategic. But at our middle manager level, even when they say, oh, well, you're going to be in charge of the resiliency and moving stations around and organising resources, that's still tactics.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, and to be honest with you, as I say, I wouldn't take great issue with your own description a few minutes ago of what you felt might be strategic, because, as I say, within the English language, that's valid. But even within a fire brigade now, not the multi-agency goal group, even within a fire brigade, there are times, and I go to civil disturbances as one of the best examples that I've experienced, is that the discussions between a chief officer via the chair of his authority and the chief executive of the affected local areas, political decisions come into it, and sometimes those political decisions have to have an expression down towards the tactical level. So that is a strategic decision being made way away from the incident ground due to political, economic, financial, legal concerns. And
Absolutely.
as we know, to our cost sometimes, we ignore the legal and financial dimensions at our peril. They'll come back to. I am one of those unfortunate incident commanders who has stood in the High Court of Justice 5 years after my incident, where I was making decisions.
Really?
To answer for them. Yeah.
That's got to be uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, but it's the real world, and I think it's something that you need to take account of in the training and development of senior commanders, particularly at principal level, because you're the ones who are going to be stood there in the.
I actually went, total segue, but as an interesting thing that people need to consider at sea. I went on a senior leadership course a little while ago, not because I'm anywhere near that position. I was just invited on it because of the podcast, and we went through an exercise of what do you do with the death in service, and I was like, what a great drill. What a great exercise. What a great scenario. You've probably done them before. Hopefully not for real, although perhaps. But yeah, most people don't know what to do. Because it's not something you ever really want to speak about, and it rarely ever happens. But what to do with the death in service? What do you legally need to do? What are the formalities? What does the Crown expect from you? What does the police expect from you? What does the HSE expect from you?
Yeah.
Stuff you never even thought about. Horrible thing, but
that's example, and lots of other, shall we say, hopefully rarely encountered, but really difficult situations was what I just routinely built into the exercises on the Gold Command course that I then ran.
Perfect.
Because at the end of the day, there's no point going down there having discussions about how many jets you put into use. It's got to be about something that really makes you scratch your head when it's crunch time.
Those wicked problems where there's it's the best worst case scenario.
Yeah. The term "wicked problems" was introduced to me by Rona Flynn, and she used it a lot. And so that was, again, with Alan Brunacini. I credit Professor Rona Flynn with much of what I know and used in subsequent.
I want to be respectful of our time, but I wanted to hit you with a couple of last minute or last closing considerations just to try and zoom out in a bit of a holistic mindset, because often when I speak to, and it's been a real privilege to share some time with you today, Kev, when I speak to people that have experienced this stuff firsthand, because a lot of what you've said today, some people may have heard, but they'll have heard it fifth or sixth hand, and it'll have Chinese whispered its way through the vines of the fire service and spat out the other end, very different to its origins. So I really appreciate you giving some of that. But I often think that, as is today's been an example, we need to remember more than we need to learn. So I wanted to try and encapsulate some of your thoughts on a few things before we wrap it up for today. And the first one being, what do you think in today's age, makes an effective incident commander? And I'm not just talking in terms of technical skills, but in terms of mindset and presence as well. What do you think you've seen in some of the best incident commanders you've had the privilege of working with, or perhaps characteristics you've tried to aspire to?
Yeah. Well, that's the Holy Grail. If you go through the leadership books that we, starting from John Adair and going onwards, you get lists. You get lists of positive characteristics that you should find in a leader. And fortunately, there's common aspect in all of those lists, but you're still trying to drill down into that essence that makes the effective commander. Now, I'm not going to start going off into the surreal and the intangible too much, but there is an intangible element to it. And one of the big problems that we first encountered in the command competence, which is the field this question would fall within, How do you determine that someone's competent to be a commander? And then obviously within that, how do you make them a great commander? Now, we have got the problem within assessment of measuring things that can be measured. You can't, obviously, by definition, measure the things you can't measure. And I'm afraid that, if I sort of say a healthy body, it might be 6 foot long and it might weigh this amount and have 2 working eyes and ears and what have you. And you've got all that, but unfortunately, it's lying on a mortuary slab, so it's not actually much use to you. What is the essence between that on the mortuary slab and the one that's actually running the marathon? Now, it's the intangible stuff. There is an essence. Now, I wouldn't be arrogant enough to try and say I know, but I have a sense. I've seen it, and I've felt it. And there is a command present, and you know it when they enter a room. And I can't again put a metric up against it and sort of say you need to have some of this, but if anything, there's a sort of it's a confidence that is very confident, almost, but not quite verging on the arrogant. It is an ability to communicate. It is a closeness to the people that have been communicated to, an affinity with them. Great incident commanders that I've worked with, on the whole, tend to be liked. I haven't come across many that I regard as great incident commanders who the people under them despise them, although I've read many military histories where you get examples of that. But so, I mean, if I were to start from scratch, I would sort of say, look, go through all the basic stuff. You've got to have a certain IQ. You've got to be fit. You've got to be able to interact with your environment. You've got to be a good communicator. You've got to want to. You've got to, as we've said, have all of the technical equipment in the background. There's no point trying to learn building mechanics or hydraulics when you're on the incident ground. And the one word that I would circle on would be composure. I think that if we're trying to find something where you will find that hidden essence, you might find it somewhere within that concept of composure. Not because, and I hesitate too much to talk about the incident commander who remains cool, because there's 2 reasons why you're cool. One is that you've seen it all before, you know exactly what's happening, and you know what to do. And the other reason is you haven't got a clue what's going on. You should be frightened, but you're not. And so you've got to try. Yeah, and so that's the wrong kind of cool. So
it's the cycle of consciously incompetent or unconsciously incompetent. It's that consciously competent leadership cycle. Yeah, but there's also it's the keeping your head about yourself is the Rudyard Kipling poem, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, so
fantastic poem. If you can keep your head when all amongst around are losing theirs, I love that. Absolutely love that piece of work.
A great piece. So I would hesitate because far greater people than me have tried to make these lists, and all of the lists are good. I haven't ever come across a list yet where I've said that's rubbish, because it's all valid. But it's a case of if you put down 10 characteristics, then the way I look at it is there's 9 gaps in between those words, and somewhere in those 9 gaps, there's the magical element that we have not yet pinned down. But it does, and I think in terms of selection procedures, back in the day, you went for the best. If you had 100 people and there was 100 scores, you went for the top 10. You didn't play games with having to be representative or what have you.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, and we both know it, and everybody involved knows with it. So I don't want to make anything uncomfortable, but what I've noticed is that maybe sometimes public service, military, what have you, are not doing themselves full justice. They're not picking
the public don't care. When the push comes to shove, The public don't care. They want the most competent, fittest, strongest, most professional. They don't care how long your hair is, what bits of your body you've got, how tall you are, what you sound like, what you look like. They don't care. They want really good. That's what they want. When the house is on fire, when the robbers trying to get in your house, when the enemy is at the gate, they don't care. They want really good, really safe,
I agree.
really competent, really professional. And I agree with you, just to not go down that rabbit hole too far, but we have to stand guard at the door of standard, not to dilute it too far and forget what we're actually supposed to be doing.
It's difficult to avoid politics altogether, but I was serving at a senior level when the change of approach happened. From the old days where you had a stiff test and the top percentage that you needed came through, going to this idea of that there's a pool who have reached an adequate standard and take from that. Now, all I would say is this: it makes the prospect of getting a great candidate through
blind luck is what it makes it. Because we say I think we're promoting great people. I'm like, no, because we do sometimes promote great people, but not by design. They are in that pool of greatness, but where they landed in that spectrum of greatness is a bit of a throwing a coin in the air. But yeah, John McDonough, close friend of mine, Australian. He and it's not true of all firefighters, but like you say, when you create that environment of standards, he said that we've got to be careful that the modern firefighter doesn't raise to a level of mediocrity that just avoids further scrutiny. We should encourage the best amongst us, all of us, to be the best version of ourselves and provide equal opportunity and da-da-da-da-da-da. But when someone is just head and shoulders above the rest in whatever it might be, their operational competence, their financial management abilities, whatever, put them in. We talk about best fit, don't we? We talk about right people in right places. Well, if Kev's got a certain skill set, put him in training school. Yeah. Because that's where he's best. That's what we've sort of devised from his abilities. I want to be respectful of your time, brother. We've gone for like nearly 2 hours there, I think, hour and a half.
Have we?
Is there anything? Yeah, it just whistles by, mate. I absolutely love it. Is there anything we want to circle back to? I would love to have you on again at some point in the future, mate. I'm sure when you listen back to this, you'll go, oh, Jesus, we forgot to say this, that, or the other. There's a million things I'm sure we could have gone down as well. But I also want to keep it digestible for people, because we've gone through so much here. There will be people who'll have to listen back and pause it and cycle back at places. But is there anything we want to close with, to leave in the mind, in the ear of the listener, to kind of wrap up the summary from our conversation today?
Well, as you said, thank you for taking us on an interesting circuit through the things that have gone on. But yeah, one thing I would emphasize to some who thought the incident command was in the too difficult to do bracket, and that came across in various ways of various forms of resistance. And I used to have to always emphasize, look, it's not a choice whether you do incident command or not. It's a choice about whether you do it well or badly. And so complying with the principles that we've outlined that are in the books and what have you, keep to the simple stuff. If you adhere to the simple stuff and understand it, that's the big thing. You're going to be a massive advance over where we were pre-1995. And there are simple, priorities to get ready in your mind as a tactician. When you go to an incident, I've seen more inexperienced people get misled by being charmed by looking at large bodies of orange flame going up and smoke. And the experienced people were never looking at that. They were looking at the side, they were looking at the round and the back. Be careful, look and pay attention. and get your priorities right. If there's rescues to be made, make them first. If there are exposure risks that are in danger, take care of them next. Contain the fire next. And after you've contained it, you can start to extinguish it. Have an idea in your own mind about, and it's the simple metrics or
fundamentals.
Fundamentals.
Keep it simple. Kiss principle. Sometimes we struggle to see the forest through the trees, don't we? I always try to say to people, like, is the incident happening to you, or are you happening to the incident? It's sometimes where I try, and you need to assert yourself on this, because all of us, firefighters, we're pack animals. Somebody needs to take command. Doesn't mean shout, doesn't mean point, but it does mean be assertive. Otherwise, someone else will take command, whether they put the jacket on or not. Their sheer actions and desire for the fact that's why they joined the fire service. And the incident is just going to happen to you and around you. So make sure, it doesn't mean you've got to have all the ideas. Does mean you take all the responsibility. But if you don't think you've got the ideas, crowdsource that knowledge from your team. Do it quickly. Make a decision, because indecision is a decision in itself.
Exactly that. And don't forget that sometimes, you're being paid to have a different view to the team. And sometimes you have to implement that and have the confidence to implement it and stand up with that decision afterwards. But that's just goes with any...
It's a game we play, baby. Kev, thank you so much for your time, mate. I really do appreciate that. Please send my love to the family and everybody. And I really look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you very much, Pete.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, live with intention, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.